Racism in Britain and in sport in Britain is as old as the hills. Just the other day, I had to stop reading a Billy Bunter book to my kids, published in the year I was born, so old but not ancient history. So egregious was the racism and other bad things emblazoned on every page. Somehow, though, when it's so recent that you actually know both the victim and the perpetrator, it's all the more chilling.
As the tabloids got to work on cricketer Azeem Rafiq, two things became clear. Whistleblowing ain't easy, and heroes often have feet of clay.
One of the most distinguished men in England happens to be quite an authority on the game of cricket. Writer and broadcaster Peter Oborne joins us now. Peter, it's just not cricket, is it? What Azeem told the parliamentary committee, or is it cricket?
Well, the idea of cricket, which we all, I've been playing cricket for almost 60 years now, George. I don't know if you Scots play cricket or not. There is actually.
We're not as good as you.
And we've got some very fine players, actually, including some England captains. Never mind. The idea, it's fair play, it's decency, it's cucumber sandwiches, and it's inclusive as well, because, you know, the great story of cricket is the rise of the West Indies cricket team, the Pakistani cricket team, India defeating England for the first time in 1971, now Afghanistan. And instead we have this awful tale of racism and bullying. It's very grim.
Wasn't it, I mentioned my Billy Bunter book that I had to jettison. Wasn't it rather, the game was born in the English public schools. Isn't this actually public school behaviour?
You know, the former cricketer, Gino Best, wrote a very interesting piece saying that it's to do with the drinking culture. It's not the only thing, but, you know, that everybody has to go out, have 10 pints. You don't do that, you're not part of it. If you do that, people get very aggressive. It's part of one of the most disturbing elements of the Azeem Rafiq story is the way he had wine as a Muslim poured down his throat when he was 15 or 16 years old. Now that is bullying, it's racist, it's Islamophobic, it's utterly disrespectful.
Yes, but one of the things that struck me most was how stupid and self-harming it all was. We both know that Yorkshire is a bank of enormous, hundreds of thousands of young Asians who love cricket and could have made Yorkshire even greater.
Yeah, basically, and we've known this for decades, George. The Asian community, Bradford, they're a wonderfully rich immigrant Asian community, all of whom adore cricket, and they've been systemically excluded by the Yorkshire Cricket Club, one way or another, for much of that time, all of that time. And you've got to see that as part of a wider society problem, rather than just to do with the Yorkshire Cricket Club. And at the same time, of course, there's a lot of evidence of racism, Islamophobia in other clubs too, other parts of the country.
But Peter, there is racism in football too. So how do these two sports compare to each other?
It is interesting because actually the racism in football crowds has been absolutely ghastly, but among the players, very much less. I mean, one of the tragedies as a huge fan of English cricket is the way that the West Indians who emerged and blossomed in the 1960s and 1970s of that Windrush generation, they came into the county first-class game, and that seemed to be, rather at the moment that Clyde Best was playing for West Ham, that first generation of black footballers in England who had to put up with a huge amount of racism. And now if you look at the Premier League, they've got loads of brilliant black, Middle Eastern heritage, like, I mean, you've got some fantastic players, whereas in the English county game, the black players cease to come through, and it really worries me why that is. And you've got to ask whether that's due to a sort of fuddy-duddy institutional racism on behalf of the people who run the game. And the answer, I'm afraid, has to be yes.
You're right to say that racism from the great unwashed on the terraces is one thing. What was disturbing most about Azeem's tale was that this racism was being literally poured down his throat by his own teammates. You wonder at the psychological perversity of that.
I think that, and I've been talking to a lot of former players about this, and it's very common. It's what they had to put up with. I do think it's worth saying it's part of a much wider racism in British society. It's what immigrants to our country, to our shame, have to deal with. And I think we should regard this as a problem which goes way beyond cricket. And actually, we must welcome the fact that the Azeem Rafiq case has really highlighted something which must be confronted. I think that cricket needs and so that in many ways, does Britain needs a sort of truth and reconciliation commission. I mean, just to come to terms with it. I mean, for instance, somebody like Peter Hayne, Lord Hayne, who you may have, I mean, who established his reputation as a young man, very young man, as a student, fighting apartheid, fighting the South African tour of England, which was due for in 1970, and perhaps him now as an elderly former Labour cabinet minister could have the authority just to have such a reconciliation where people can say, I got this wrong. They're given the freedom to say, look, I said something 10 years ago, it was absolutely appalling. I do understand, I apologise for it. And I think that if something like that could happen in Yorkshire and across the whole English game of cricket, I think that would be wonderful.
Well, that interestingly takes us into the cancel culture issue, because it transpired that the man complaining about the racism to which he'd been subjected had himself been guilty of racism in texts and so on.
Well, I think his texts, what they to do with inappropriate sexual behaviour. I haven't read them.
It's the whole 9 yards, I'm afraid. It's anti-Semitic messages to another cricketer about a third cricketer. It's improper behaviour towards a 16-year-old girl and other things. I mean, the tabloids have really got to work on Azeem, proving, as Gayatri said at the beginning, that whistleblowing isn't easy. None of that invalidates his criticisms, though, and his experience, does it?
As far as I know, he's apologised for these wretched episodes, and he's endured that kind of scrutiny, not easy, but he doesn't invalidate in any way whatever, as you've just said, his own experience. And that's what we need to concentrate on as a society. And as a cricket lover who does believe that cricket is about mixing cultures, mixing races, any religion, it's a rich experience about engaging in a competitive way or a social way, in my case of cricket, with all kinds of different people from any number of different backgrounds, and it's all about mutual respect, mutual tolerance, multiculturalism, all of the things which it means to be British.
Yeah.
And that there's this very ugly culture which has emerged in the cricket world is against all of that.
Well, Peter, I don't want to belittle, obviously, the case and experiences Azeem went through. And obviously, in the sport itself, I hope the racism will be tackled. But out of that world, in the media, I do wonder whether the case has been milked too much, and it's inviting people, because I have been hearing wall-to-wall reportage on the case, inviting people to bring out their stories of their personal experiences of racism, and then they bring up stories from when they were very little, a long, long time ago, when Britain was indeed more racist than it was today, or they bring up stories for when they face people in their drunk state, when they say ugly things, and I just wonder whether that brings out too much of that.
I think there's some wisdom in what you're saying there, because people, when they're very young, do or say very stupid things. But I actually wonder whether Britain has got more racist in the last few years rather than less. I think one of what is so shocking about the Azeem Rafiq's material, which goes far beyond sort of the occasional ill-judged tweet, is that it's so, that you have an environment in English sport which really it seems to be worse than what happened in the 1950s when Billy Bunter was a popular read for youngsters. Something's darker now. And I think that's why I think we do need to, these are contemporary stories about the experience of Asian, Black players in English cricket. And let's not forget, there isn't a single out gay footballer. What's that all about? So we're full of bigotry in our society, and we need to confront it.
Peter Oborne, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik.